You're muted.
Okay. And is it just me on this?
Do I stop?
Thanks, Maria. Hello, everyone. Welcome to These Magic Hands. This is the second installment in our Combahee Conversations series. And if you haven't checked out our first Combahee Conversation interface, I highly encourage you to do so. And you can find that underneath the Boston Center of the Arts. And
thanks, Maria.
Sorry, guys.
Hello,
I'm getting
everyone.
some feedback.
Welcome to.
I don't know why that was doing that. Okay, let me continue. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to start all over. Welcome to These Magic Hands. This is the second installment of our Combahee Conversation series. So this is a series of free online dialogues organized as a part of the rolling citywide public art project, Combahee's Radical Call, Black Feminism's Reawaken Boston. My name is Arielle Gray. I am one of the co-curators of this project, along with Sierra Peters and Jen Mergel. And if you haven't heard about Combahee's Radical Call, it is inspired by and developed in direct dialogue with Demita Frazier, co-founder of Boston's Combahee River Collective. If you don't know about Combahee River Collective, I again highly encourage you to research and check out their work. They were a group of radical socialists, Black feminists, and lesbians who were active in community organizing and publishing in Boston in the 70s. And so in that spirit, through June 2021, we are occupying public spaces with installations, designs, and also digital resources. And by doing so, we are hoping to serve to amplify the voices and also counter the erasure of Black femme cultural leaders across Boston's neighborhoods. So there's a really beautiful mural down right now at the Mills Gallery that was painted by Mitsuka. And then we also have free copies of a zine designed by Zoe Pulley that kind of reimagines the Combahee River Collective statement that was released in the 70s. So I definitely encourage everyone to go down there and check that out. And so today, the title of this conversation is These Magic Hands, and we named it that for a reason. And so we really just kind of wanted to get into equity when it comes to land sovereignty and ecology. And so from Miriam Miranda in Honduras to Fannie Lou Hamer in the Deep South, land sovereignty and stewardship has always been entangled with liberation. And so for this conversation, we're inviting Maria Pinto and Nia Holley to join us and talk about the power of these magic hands while exploring sustainable and equitable visions for Black and Indigenous people of color and our communities. And so we're going to be asking some really important questions today. We invite everyone to drop their questions down in the chat. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the conversation, but for now, just drop it in the chat and we'll keep note. The other thing that I do want to say, just really quickly in light of everything that happened this week in Atlanta, I can't speak for Boston Center of the Arts, but I can speak for the co-curators of this project. And we just want to say that we stand in solidarity with our Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. Our fight has always been entangled against white supremacy, and we'll continue working in solidarity with each other against white patriarchy, against sexism, against racism, and against xenophobia. So just to introduce really quickly our speakers, first we have Maria Pinto. Maria Pinto is a Boston area writer, mushroom enthusiast, editor, and educator. She currently teaches for the literary nonprofit Grub Street. She reads fiction for The Drum and Peripheries Journal and has been awarded fellowships by the Vermont Studio Center. You can find her singing loud whenever she passes under a bridge. And when the season's right, you can find her filling her skillet and camera roll with fungal fruiting bodies. Maria is one of my inspirations right now, especially when it comes to getting into mushrooms and mycology. We're really excited to hear from her. And then Nia Holley, who is another one of my favorite people. She is an interdisciplinary artist whose work is deeply influenced by what survival and healing look like within Black and Indigenous communities. She has a wide range of talent. She does printmaking, ceramics, I don't know if she would necessarily consider herself an herbalist, but I do. She's always making these amazing tinctures and just things that she's foraged equitably from the land around her. She strives to cultivate relationships across tribal borders to rebuild a more inclusive and historical process of kinship and survival. Nia is also a co-founder of the Eastern Woodlands Rematriation Collective, and I would highly encourage everyone to go and check them out and all of the amazing work that they're doing here in Massachusetts and in New England in general. So with all of that being said, I would love to invite on Maria and Nia, I don't know why I said Neo, for our conversation. Hi guys, how are you today?
Enjoying this first day of spring for sure.
Oh yeah, it is the spring equinox, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Hi,
Yeah.
Nia, how are you?
I'm well, just.
And so for everyone watching, this conversation is going to be split into two different parts. First, Maria is going to kind of lead us through her story and her relationship with mushrooms. And then we'll also get into the work that Nia does here in Massachusetts. But I think that the reason why we're having this talk with the two of you is because your work overlaps in a lot of areas, considering land, also foraging, and then how those things have been impacted by white supremacy. So Maria, as a Black woman getting into mycology, how do you feel white supremacy kind of impacted your interest in that field, and how does it continue to impact your interest in that field?
Well, honestly, I feel like white supremacy in a lot of ways drove me to the woods. It drove me to sort of escape, the world of men and to really just, take stock of what the natural world had to offer. You'll see in my presentation that I talk a lot about how it was when I, suffered a professional setback in 2017 that I really started to just sort of immerse myself. And it was a very solitary thing for me for a while. But then when I started to go to the forums, it's the internet. it's ruled by white supremacy. There's not much more that I can say to you about, sort of trying to enter into a thing and having a bunch of white dudes that are like a comment section come to life, trying to bar your entry. So that story is like similar across the board, but they can't really block you from picking up the books and, going out with friends and, joining the clubs and stuff. So it's just been a typical journey.
How about you, Nia? And I know, your story is a little bit different from Maria, but can you just talk to us a little bit about like the ways that you've seen kind of white supremacy show up in the work that you've been doing?
I'm like, we don't have the time. There's not enough time in the world. I don't think time doesn't even exist to explain that. But I was just having this conversation yesterday. So I'm Nipmuc. So Nipmuc, or people, it means people of the freshwater. So most of central Massachusetts. I was born and raised in Worcester, and I've been living in Boston since 2013. In the land of my kin, the Massachusetts Punkapog. And the work that I do, even before I even like really got deep into the work that I consider my work, like white supremacy is just like everywhere. Like I'm lucky when I'm dreaming that it could be in there too. But I guess just the ways, I feel like the ways in which we use language really like impacts my work in that way, and how white supremacy defines and controls that. Like just having to speak English, I feel is very violent and flat, and the ways that I understand land, or like my relationship to land, hopefully much like my ancestors, there was like an understanding that the language was reflective of that relationship. And in English, that just doesn't exist because the relationship is just so vastly different and severed. Like you're not even in relationship in English with the land. So in that way, I feel like it's very impacting because it's hard to have the words to speak about my work or my relationships. And then I just, like what Maria was saying, just like white men and even white femmes too, they don't get a pass in my book, but just like the entitlement of, especially in like foraging spaces, herbalist spaces, like folks that are just exploiting like our ancestral knowledge, trying to like sell it back to us overpriced, and then deeming that they're the experts on things that we know, like we hold these truths like deep inside, whether we have the language to speak to it, like that it's there. So yeah, for me it's just like people that are interrupting that process for me. Like I was cranberry picking in October, and like there was like this random group of like, like retired people, like they're just out there, which is fine, like live your life, but don't bother me. But this one man had the nerve to come up to me. I'm just picking cranberries, and he's like, "Oh, it's okay. You can pick those." And I was like, "I'm not even speaking to you. I'm not even looking at you. Like, don't don't refer to me ever." But just that entitlement, like, why do you think that I need your permission? And like, I'm picking cranberries. So just, yeah, just shit like that or things like that. Sorry, this is on YouTube. I forgot.
No,
We
and
can't curse.
actually, I don't know.
Oh, good to know.
In our private chat, I'm actually not sure if we can. Oh yeah, I think we can. Okay, cool. You're fine, Nia. And that's so funny because that kind of brings up like my next point. And we were speaking a little bit about this before when we spoke last Sunday about this program. Is I don't think that a lot of people are aware that there are a ton of anti-foraging laws that are currently in effect throughout states in America. But historically, anti-foraging laws have been used to keep both Native and Black people from accessing the fruits of the land. And I just want to read like this really quick portion from this paper that I do kind of want to. I don't know if someone can drop it in the chat for folks, you know but the history of early American anti-foraging laws reveals that supporters of restricting foraging rights typically grounded their efforts in racism, classism, colonialism, imperialism, or some combination of these odious practices and beliefs. So we can't really untangle the conversations that we're having about like foraging and, as Nia brought up, herbalism without first addressing like the white supremacy that lives behind a lot of these laws that we currently have to kind of like abide by. I know that I've had, especially mostly white folks like approach me when I've been out looking for mushrooms, like first like hassling me on like what I'm doing, as if I can't like hike here. Maria knows like I hike a lot. And then also like, oh, well, you can't do that. You can't take that. Da 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 da. And so I totally I guess like I hear 100% what you're saying. Yeah, Maria, I don't know if you've ever had that experience while being out hunting mushrooms.
A lot of times it's the sort of like mealy mouth paternalism, like, oh, I bet you know something about mushrooms if you're picking that, like this idea that they don't think I'm gonna be careful, you know, like I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Nia, you look like you have something you want to say.
No, I'm just like laughing because it's just like I just wish that like people could just stop thinking that they're like the center of the universe. It's like, I don't know, everyone's a Leo in those positions. No offense to Leos out there, but I'll be honest.
I think Leo's watching.
Too much.
And we're kind of so we're gonna get into Maria's portion in just 2 minutes. So I mean, I think most of what we're going to talk about, you guys like have are going to address in your separate presentations. And so for folks watching, you know, if you are especially like a non-Black person, a non-Native person, a person who isn't of color, definitely like take notes. And if you see these things happening like in your neck of the woods, definitely speak up and say something. I will also say that a lot of these conservations and trusts that have like this land, we also kind of need to reimagine how we look at those. And I think, you know, Nia and I specifically will kind of maybe get into that a little bit in your presentation. But right now, I just kind of want to go ahead and give the floor to Maria Pinto, our mushroom hunter, and kind of let you take it away.
Cool. Thank you so much, Ari, for inviting me to consider these questions. I am going to share my screen. All right, so I really love a long, unwieldy, unreasonable title. And it's been a while since I've been in school, so I haven't gotten to deploy that love in a while. So here you have the title of this presentation. And when Ari invited me to take part in a conversation about what land and ecological justice looks like for BIPOC communities, at first I was like, I don't know. But then I'd been thinking a lot about Thoreau, and specifically the land in Concord, where I sometimes would forage, and where Walden fits into the American imaginary specifically. And I was like, wait a minute, maybe there's a way for me as a writer to take off sort of a writerly bite-sized chunk of this question in a way that it makes sense for, to me to address. So I decided to think about this topic by having a very beautifully one-sided argument with him, which you'll see. And to think about where I'm at, it seems necessary to consider where I'm from. So I actually really like this quote from Walden. I should not talk so much about myself if there was anybody else whom I knew half as well. And he goes on to say, unfortunately, I'm confined to this theme by the narrowness of my experience. So I'm from Jamaica. I'm from the mountains just beyond Kingston, in an area known as Lawrence Tavern. And in Jamaica, I was a farm baby. You can see this image here is my grandmother's backyard. And it's basically a gully. It's just a fertile valley with just a drop off. And we maintained a plantation of fruit trees, ackee, Otahiti apple, breadfruit, sorrel, limes, cashew, you name it, we were growing it. And to the untrained eye, it actually looks like everything just sort of volunteered, like all of it just grew wild. And in fact, I won't name names, but someone who came to visit my grandmother's place thought that it was just all volunteer fruit trees and all that kind of stuff. And you can really you can start to see how someone with a colonizer's mindset would step into a situation where, you know, very sophisticated techniques for growing these trees were used, but not really understand it. And so think, oh, it's all wild. We also kept farm animals. So when I was growing up, there was a cow, some goats, chickens, pigs. My uncle would sometimes threaten to feed me to the pigs if I misbehaved. And a different uncle also operated a little shop that sold sometimes local meat and always like Pepsi and, you know, that kind of stuff to the community. So that's where I lived. When I was still very young, I moved to an area in South Florida known as the Acreage. Just because it was just so unsettled, that's what they called it. The nearest neighbor was very far away, but my mother and stepfather managed a home farm. There were ducks, geese, sometimes peacocks even. So I continued to enjoy a lot of privilege in that way on a lot of land, just being a feral kid and sort of just being a swamp rat. It was a beautiful time, but it was also a strange time because I'd moved from this place where everyone looked like me to a place where folks were actually hostile. But I still managed to, you know, have a good childhood. After this, moved to the suburbs, to a gated community. And it felt very much like that period just was a fallow period in which, you know, the grass that was around was sod and it was all, you know, planted palm trees. I've since learned that suburban South Florida can actually, there's lots of amazing woodland ecology around there, but I didn't know that at the time and I stuck to my little, you know, subdivision. So that was sort of not the best. But fast forward a lot of years, and in February of 2004, when I was a first year in college, me and my partner landed a dog sitting job, looking after a pair of old English sheepdogs, perplexingly named Kylie and Tyler. And these beautiful 7-month-old puppies lived with their people in Brookline. And the job came with the perk of a car. So we were able to take these dogs to parks like Lars Anderson and the Arboretum. The owners encouraged us to take them off leash, which I don't think is allowed, but, and we also went to the woods behind the Chestnut Hill Mall, which I've come to know now as Hammond Pond Reservation. But back then, this was the first time I'd ever seen, you know, deciduous trees and, you know, a very different sort of landscape than I was used to as a South Floridian. And I just was instantly enchanted by it, but it wasn't, you know, sort of where the mushroom moment happened for me. Fast forward a bunch more years and I'm living one of those past lives in the suburbs of Boston again. And I was always kind of interested in foraging. Like I would go on these, you know, Skillshare walks and stuff like that and look for lamb's quarters and purslane and Japanese knotweed. But I didn't really get into the study of mushrooms until a Polish friend of mine had this party where she was giving away hens of the woods. She was a great cook and she, you know, would prepare all of these mushrooms for us. But there was a year, and I think it might have been 2017, it was such a good year for hens of the woods that she couldn't even give it away fast enough. So that was when I was struck by the idea that there's all this food that, you know, you have to sort of know when to go find it. And, you know, it's going to waste if you don't, you know, go and grab it. So it was also the best tasting mushroom I'd ever had in my life. And I was like, I really, does no one else know about this? Of course, people do know about it. And my friend is from Poland. So, you know, in Poland, it's sort of a national pastime to pick mushrooms. You go out with your family on the weekends and you pick mushrooms. They're a very mycophilic society. So that moment definitely planted a seed. But it wasn't until a professional setback in the publishing world, which is where I primarily move, that kind of sunk me into a deep depression. And I really took to the study of mushrooms, started going on these day-long walks in the woods as a way to escape people. It shifted my focus away from the vagaries of the publishing world and the depredations of capitalism to an obsession with the natural world. When is this going to be popping, and what are the signs that it will or won't? So I took to the woods to get a much needed reality check, and came back with a keen interest in taking up the mantle of naturalist once again. And I say once again because I think that all kids are naturalists sort of naturally, if given half the chance. So once I started to really study this fascinating kingdom, I realized that there was always more to learn because we actually know very, very little about mushrooms. There's so much to know. In fact, it wasn't until 1969 that they stopped being classified as plants, which I think is really disrespectful that they were once categorized as plants. The citizen scientist has so much, such a big role to play in mycology as well. The amateur naturalists posting pictures of what they find online can advance collective knowledge about fungi by a lot. Just for a moment to give Thoreau his props, he was actually an important amateur naturalist. His was a very precise set of recordings of what plants flowered and leafed when birds returned to the woods. And so scientists have, his records have actually allowed scientists to compare the current dates of those events to see how climate change has and hasn't affected the natural rhythms in the area. And I'm like, it's probably the case that, indigenous people in this area knew tons about that already, but he, is a white dude that wrote it down. So he gets the credit. But also regarding sustainability, one reason people might feel divorced from the ravages of factory farming is that many of us, especially in urban environments, don't actually see those ravages as they're happening. When you're going out trying to look for the forest food though, and it hasn't rained in 2 months, you feel your connection to anthropogenic climate change very keenly. So if you ever pick, for instance, also, if you ever pick fiddleheads or ramps and you overpick them, then you're not gonna get them next year. So going out and taking these walks gives you a clearer stake in having a responsible relationship with the land. One tangible example of the impact of citizen science from my own experience was when a mycologist noticed I'd posted a picture of a mushroom that isn't supposed to grow in this area and asked me to fill out a survey about my find, which contributed to a shift in our understanding of where this particular variety of Amanita muscaria grows. I felt really fancy in that moment. Okay, so coming full circle a little bit. In Christmas of 2019, my partner and I went for a trip back to my grandmother's place. I was very excited because it was the first time I had been in Jamaica for Christmas in a very long time. And I was excited particularly for the harvest of sorrel or Hibiscus sabdarifa. Y'all may know it, if you don't know it in this form, you might know it as the drink in Mexican restaurants, Flor de Jamaica or Jamaica. When I was a child, I was given the virgin version of this drink, which has a tea made out of the hibiscus flowers, ginger, lime, sugar, and it's just one of the most vibrant and alive tastes on the planet, and it's very seasonal. So it's coming up in my grandmother's backyard in December. So there's that link to, we have the sorrel in Christmas in December. That's when we'll be celebrating. This is my grandmother as she's dealing with the sorrel harvest. 96-year-old grandmother's leg. So we'd had a very erratic rainy season in 2019 in Massachusetts. So I was feeling very bereft of mushrooms at the time. And I was very happy to be going to a humid, hot place for, a number of reasons, but specifically for mushrooms. And in fact, the minute I got there, I saw that on the ackee tree in my grandmother's backyard was wood ear mushrooms, auricularia. And I was very thrilled to see not only, this thing, on this tree that has this connection to my youth, but it's just a stunning mushroom, in my opinion. It has this velvety, texture that even when it's dehydrated, it looks great. You can find these in Chinese cuisine. And so I'd been talking probably a normal amount of mushrooms, about mushrooms, and my uncle took notice. And he saw that these mushrooms had come up overnight during my stay. And he asked me to identify them. And I couldn't do it. So not wanting to leave any mushroom unidentified, I took to the internet. And here you can see mushroom identification in action. So here are some of the characteristics you need to know if you want to identify a mushroom on the internet. It was growing from the dead mango tree in my backyard. The region is important. The smell is important. What color are the spores? All important things. And I was able to get an answer that day, and I was able to prepare the mushroom for my grandmother on the strength of this ID. And I was very surprised when she let me feed it to her, because any society that has been colonized by British people ends up being pretty mycophobic. This is just a silly trait that they hand down, for lack of a better phrase. But my grandmother was like, I trust you. And so she liked it enough to, take a taste. So that's just like sort of a typical day in the life of a mushroom hobbyist during the season, spending a day trying to identify a mushroom and not necessarily being able to. Okay. And this sort of brings me to my real quibble with Thoreau. Here I am with Thoreau, or a statue of him at Walden Pond. Thoreau had a lot of wonderful, useful things to say about a modern subject's weird relationship to work, and how maybe we shouldn't work all the time just to amass money. But I think he missed the mark a little bit in emphasizing self-sufficiency as a goal, as though that's even possible. And his view and the importance of Walden may have contributed to the already warped notion that so many North Americans hold, that we're anything but deeply, deeply, deeply interdependent. Like the trees in the forest who speak with one another and share nutrients through mycorrhizae. That's right, the fungal networks that produce mushrooms also connect the trees in a forest and help them share food and even information with one another. So if you've ever read Walden and seen discussions about it, people often point out that he was not, in fact, living wholly by his own labor, not even a little bit. He had an aunt who helped with food and laundering and all that kind of stuff. But he also writes about the former Black inhabitants of the woods, which is nice, but I would rather have had a whole book about them, because these completely disenfranchised people who probably didn't have an aunt to do their laundry, definitely didn't have an aunt to do their laundry. And if they did, it's really difficult for me to imagine them rattling on about getting by the work of their hands. They likely networked among themselves and did serious homesteading where possible when their walnut trees weren't being pillaged by white villagers. And they probably had foraging techniques down. So I want to know more about these people who are forced to subsist from the work of their hands by the forces of institutional racism and settler colonialism. But maybe that's just me. So Thoreau in some ways represents this idea of radical individualism, and that, as you probably know all too well, that radical individualism has gotten us in a lot of freaking trouble. I would prefer to keep an abundance mindset, especially when we're talking about mushrooms, which are in fact abundant. So just a quick little interlude to talk about the ridiculousness of scarcity mindset when it comes to forageable mushrooms in this area. When I first got serious about mushrooms and started boring people at parties, this one acquaintance tried to scare me out of foraging as merrily as I had been along the Emerald Necklace, because he'd heard that a commercial picker, a commercial forager, so I think he was actually just supplying illegally to restaurants in the area. But this guy, if he saw you foraging in spots that he deemed his, he would shank you with his mushroom knife, is what was said. And the guy's name was Frodo. And it's like, why would I be frightened of someone named Frodo? That's like a hobbit's name. I'm 5'9" and I'm also carry a mushroom knife. So like, anyway, so that's where I'm at. I'm a very enthusiastic relative beginner who's beginning to realize how hungry our communities are for, the knowledge of mushrooms. So we're getting to some of the better parts here. One of my favorite things ever is this quotation from Fannie Lou Hamer, who is a civil rights activist from Mississippi, who, among other things, founded an agricultural cooperative called Freedom Farm. And the quote goes, "When you've got 400 quarts of greens and gumbo soup canned for the winter, nobody can push you around or tell you what to do." This resonates with me so much because, it shows so much about how the ability to nourish ourselves fuels not only just our days, but our movements. And there's no more sovereign feeling than to be able to not only grow your own food, but to be able to go to the woods and pick something up off the ground and say, I can, this will provide me with the nutrients my body needs. The first time I went to the woods and specifically knew that I wanted to pick this mushroom because it grew at this time of year with this set of trees, it felt like a superpower, but it really shouldn't feel like a superpower. Okay. So this is a picture of many, many pounds of hen of the woods mushrooms that I was processing by drying. And so mushrooms in your diet. Mushrooms are low in calories and contain essential nutrients, vitamins, and minerals such as vitamin D. And hens of the woods mushrooms in particular, which we just saw in that last slide, for instance, they're meaty in texture and flavor and contain compounds that help lower cholesterol, modulate your immune system, and lower your risk of heart disease. So these properties make fungi less of a survival food and more of a nutritious accent to your dishes, in my opinion. But they're still wonderful to be able to add to the table. One of the more important things I think about learning your land in this way, though, is just the importance of forest bathing, as the Japanese call it, getting out into the woods, exercising, getting to notice small things, slowing down in order to find some of these mushrooms that don't want you to find them, by the way. They're tricksters. They're hiding from you. So that's that. These are some of the things you want to be looking for when you're trying to identify your mushrooms. Does it have gills, pores, teeth? Is it cup-shaped? Is it hollow? The substrate, or what it's growing from, its aroma, its taste, its spore color. Does it change color when it's bruised? And the growth habit, does it cluster? Does it grow singly? And mushrooms that flush big in our area are as follows. Grifola frondosa, or hen of the woods. I've seen these bad boys, fruit to like 20 whole pounds of fruiting body. So you can see the mushroom there. I actually had to leave that one there because I already had enough to process. And I went on the internet and said, this is where it is, someone go get it. But key identifying characteristics of hen of the woods, they grow at the bases of oak trees generally, sometimes beech. That word frondosa means frondose, or they have leaf-like or frond-like structures. The fertile surface, or the pore surface of this mushroom, is white. If it's starting to get like a cream colored or even a yellow, then it's probably a little too far gone. But some people like them when they're a little bit fungier. Here you can see the white pore surface, and my lovely friend Rebecca modeling it. Craterellus phallax is another one that flushes pretty big in this area. If you find one, chances are you're going to find many more. And it has a pink spore print. So a spore print is just when you put the mushroom down on a surface and it leaves its spores, which is usually how they reproduce. On that surface, what color are those spores that it's left behind? Craterellus phallax, or black trumpet, has a pink spore print. You'll often find them in oak and pine and beech areas. They like to grow in moss. Really, probably you can just see them when they're in moss a lot better, because they also like to blend in. Pleurotus austriatus, or oyster mushrooms. These are a real workhorse. They're the ones that you find people cultivating most likely, because they really love to produce a lot at a time. They have this brown, gray sort of cap, and their pore surface is white. They like to fruit on hardwoods. And there is the underside. Another key identifying characteristic of oyster mushrooms is that they smell of anise or licorice, and just like the tiniest bit of like fish. And here's a weird one. Entaloma abortivum is also known as shrimp of the woods. And the thing that we're calling shrimp of the woods is actually this lump of tissue here. Entaloma abortivum is the name of the cap and stem mushroom that you see to the left, with a pink spore print. But this is actually what you're seeing in this image, is Entaloma abortivum parasitizing Armillaria mellia. And just the tissue that results is delicious. It doesn't sound delicious. I'm not really selling it, but it is actually really delicious. It has a unique texture. And speaking of Armillaria mellia, I don't really recommend this mushroom for beginners because there are toxic lookalikes, but it's just so beautiful. And that mellia, the honey, where it gets this honey name, you can really see why from that cap color. And I like armillaria because it will fruit when everything else is like, no, too dry. So even during that drought, there was still honey mushrooms coming up. Latiparus cincinnatus, or chicken of the woods, also Latiparus sulphureus, both known by the same common name, but different mushrooms. This one has a coral cap and then like a sort of tan pore surface. You'll see them fruiting at the bases of hardwoods. And then the shelf Latiparus sulphureus likes to fruit from fallen dead trees. Calvatia gigantea, or giant puffballs. I'm not partial to this mushroom. I don't think it has very much flavor, but I'm told that chefs like to dry it out and ground it to a powder to thicken sauces. Not many things look like this mushroom. In fact, you tend to think that you're looking at a volleyball, and then you get closer and you see that it's actually a mushroom. Ganoderma tsugae, this is one of the medicinal mushrooms, highly prized for its medicinal qualities. It's immunomodulatory, and actually at this stage, when it's very young and it still has a white outer rim, the outer rim is edible and it tastes like chicken. I think it tastes more like chicken than chicken of the woods does. And, but when it does age, and you're harvesting it for its medicinal purposes, it is maroon and it looks lacquered. Trametes versicolor, or turkey tail, is another medicinal mushroom that I just think is also just very lovely. Used to make teas and tinctures, has some of the same medicinal properties as Ganoderma tsugae, including or with the addition of anti-cancer properties. So actually, important note about where to find these. You'll find them on eastern hemlock trees, or Tsuga canadensis. That's why Ganoderma tsugae is the Latin binomial. And is it possible to overpick mushrooms? The short answer is no. It is, people like to liken it, you see this a lot. People like to liken it to just picking the fruits of a tree. And I like to say, like, especially if you're in these urban environments and you see a beautiful flush of chicken of the woods, and you're just, collecting it for your own purposes, leave a little bit for the next person, because I have often felt very indebted to the first person to reach a flush of mushrooms that they did that. It's just like courteous, I guess. Cooking mushrooms, dry sauteing is so important. I just very quickly have to say that people who don't tend to like mushrooms because of textural reasons, I think it's because they're skipping this step. Mushrooms are 90+% water. So leaching away some of the water so that you can get caramelization on the surface of the mushroom is so important, and people skip it. And I think that's why so many people don't like it, because they're meaty and delicious and just full of umami. So here you can see a squash mac and cheese. Preserving mushrooms, you can dry them, make jerky. You can make a duxelles, which is just mashing them together with some sort of allium source like garlic or onion, and you can freeze them. Like all of the things that I have shown you pictures of, save for maybe the turkey tail, you can preserve in this way. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I have only this year come into a realization that mushroom foraging is a way to build community and to talk to other people about this land that we're living with. So I'm very excited to continue and to see where this story takes us.
Ooh, thank you, Maria. Oh, that was so good. Thank you for taking us through like how you took us through like your grandmother's land in Jamaica, back here, and then back again. You're such a writer. Just the just the way you described her, I was like, I could tell this girl writes. She's a writer.
Yeah.
Oh no, what were you about to say?
I'm saying, like, I was worried because I don't feel like a natural speaker, so I do write things down and I'm like, but I'm reading too much, but okay. I'm glad y'all liked it.
It was a wonderful story. I love how you took us through everything. And you also brought up a lot of issues too that I think we're going to be able to get into deeper with Nia and all of her work with the rematriation project. What does land rematriation means? And as Maria, as you pointed out, what does it mean to have a responsible relationship with this land that we're on? So yeah, I'm really excited to get into that with Nia next. Thanks so much, Maria.
Yes, my pleasure.
And Nia, I don't know if you want to maybe just share your screen now or perhaps later after we get into some of these questions.
Yeah, I'm debating. I was thinking about that. I was like listening so intently to Maria, but then I was like, oh, I'm almost next. Like, what am I gonna do?
Well, first, we can start off with, I think some people, if you were here at like the beginning of the program and you saw some of the slides that were cycling, you probably noticed a land acknowledgement there. A lot of organizations have been using land acknowledgements to, I guess, kind of acknowledge the land that we're on or that we're currently on. I did not really say the land acknowledgement for a reason that I think perhaps we can use to like kick off this conversation, because Nia, this is something that you and I have talked about a lot and have discussed a lot. And I would love to kind of get into that and into why, I think land acknowledgements are kind of like a sign of, I guess, like goodwill or good intent, but in actuality, they're very kind of like empty and oftentimes incorrect. Like a lot of times these acknowledgements are not naming the right people. So Nia, can you talk a little bit about that, please?
It's like my number one rant topic, especially when we're thinking about Boston. I wish we could see the participants, because I would just ask, like, how many people think Boston's Wampanoag land, like see how many people raise their hand, which is just incorrect. It's not Wampanoag. Boston is Massachusetts Punkapog. Like, I want everyone at home, just repeat that to yourself 3 times. Boston is Massachusetts Punkapog. That's it.
Say it one more time, Nia.
Boston is Massachusetts Punkapog. Yeah, there are relationships obviously with like other tribal communities in this area. I'm Nipmuc. I do have a strong connection to Boston, just with the Boston Harbor Islands and with King Philip's War. My ancestors were interned there. I'm actually named after one of the survivors, which is fortunate but unfortunate. But yeah, like land acknowledgements is just like, having a diversity committee or like equity and inclusion training. Like, it sounds great, but it's nothing in reality. And I'm saying that because I'm a Black person and I can speak to how that does nothing for me. But yeah, exactly. Like, it's like anti-racist. Like, what are these words that we're using and why don't they mean anything? And why does it just feel like, what is that show? Not Scooby-Doo, Charlie Brown. Like, yeah, that's what it sounds like. So I really feel like land acknowledgement statements are often just like land identification. And as you mentioned, like more than half the time, they're not even accurate. But if you do want to do land acknowledgements, like know that to acknowledge this land, that means like you're acknowledging the people of this land. Like we the land is our kin, like we're a part of the land. If you're going to be acknowledging the land, you need to be acknowledging us as well. And to do that, you need to be in relationship with us, be in relationship with the land, with the people of this place. Like, yeah, it's just like the same as if someone's just saying my name, like, I don't know who you are. There's no relationship. You're not acknowledging me. You're just saying my name. If you say it,
correctly.
right. Like at the doctor's office, I'm like, yeah, sure, I'm Nia. But, and they don't acknowledge me. So, yeah, I guess I'm just thinking of it like that. But I do have, I can show a clip that is that can speak a little bit deeper to land acknowledgements, if folks want to do that real quick.
Yeah, of course.
All right, I have so many tabs. Okay.
Story of my life. I always have like 30 tabs open.
Right, it's like online shopping. You just keep it in your bag.
Yeah, I don't know why I don't bookmark it because it's so easy to bookmark. I just want to keep it open.
All right, sorry. Can everyone see this screen?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay. Wait, hold on. I'm so technologically illiterate. Okay.
Oftentimes when introducing ourselves and explaining ourselves, some of our people share our creation stories, which interestingly enough usually mirror geological processes and formation of the landscape that we're named of, that we belong to. Our creation stories do the exact opposite with how Western society kind of separates us from the landscape. Even though Westerners named us after the landscape, they also removed us from that very landscape. So when we're thinking about ecologies, we can't only focus on plants or the environment.
If you go back 10,000 years, the harbor islands were not islands. The entire, what is now the Boston Harbor, was dry land. We lived there, and then when the sea came in, we moved inland.
Our creation stories help us understand who we are, how we came to be in this place, and what our responsibility and role is among all of the other inhabitants, beings, and species of that space.
We've been here for thousands of years. We're still here, and we will remain here.
There's a reason why many Indigenous peoples will start with those stories. And there's a reason why folks that support power, domination, and control will try to discredit those stories and that knowledge. There's beauty in the work that we are able to do when we are with the land. I believe it holds memory, and it may not be the same language that we're using right now or that we're used to, but things come to us the more that we're in relation to the system that we're supposed to be in relation to.
So I'll stop there. And I can share the link to the full video. I was like, movie. I guess, I don't know, but I can share the link to the actual clip. But yeah.
And one thing that you said really stood out to me. Well, that is you, right? Because I'm pretty sure I recognize your voice. That was you talking at the end, right?
I hate hearing myself, but yeah, you can hear me in it a little bit.
You said that the land has memory. And yeah, I really want, and I think this is probably where you're going next, if you're going back in your slideshow. And it's crazy because me and my boyfriend were watching some video on like the cultivation of cannabis. And they were basically talking about like how the roots literally form a memory with the other roots that they're next to, because they do develop, Maria was talking about these mycorrhizal connections with each other. They know each other, they speak to each other. And so when a plant is removed, you know, they know that that thing is missing. And yeah, I would just really love to hear you talk more about like how that manifests both like in your current practice and in other ways.
Yeah, yeah, the land being memory to me is just, I feel like that, not that I need like the reminder to know that like the land is a living, breathing thing, but I feel like it's just, it can be like a really beautiful like metaphor to when talking to other folks in the way that I understand land. Um, but yeah, I guess also it just like makes me think of when I was in school, I had this one professor. She had written a book, and I don't remember what it's called, but there was one thing in the book. She was talking about this concept of residence time when thinking about the transatlantic. I don't even, not journey, but that just like the ocean. And thinking about like the folks that, you know, either willingly jumped overboard, were forced to go overboard, whose bodies were just dumped in the water. With residence time, the way that your body breaks down in some of the mineral contents in your blood, like those contents are still alive in the water today. So that kind of just like shifted a lot of things for me, just thinking about water and land and like the soil, thinking about how like there's water content in the soil, and thinking about like how the moon just like, you know, controls water. I'm not a scientist. I'm not even like elementary when I explain like scientific things. I'm like, this does this, I think, and I don't know, it happened like that. But with like water, just like, I don't know, for me to like think about like how like the folks that had to endure that passage are still alive today. They're still with us today. And then to think about when they were brought to this side of the world and to this land. I'll talk about this land in particular since we're here. And like their blood being in the soil, like how are they not still alive today or with us today in that way? So, and then just with that understanding, and then thinking about land in general having memory, like how could they not, or how could the land not like remember us? How is the land not a part of us? Like we come from the land. I descend from the land here in all the ways. So yeah, I guess that's kind of like where that whole thing kind of comes from. And that's something I say that like not all the time, but when I do talk, I guess. But yeah, did that make sense?
Yes, it did. That was beautiful.
And yeah, so I guess to relate it back to the clip, thinking about like creation stories, and to sort of like ground or to further ground like where I'm kind of coming from or my perspective. There's this one, I don't know if folks have heard of, sometimes people talking about North America being called Turtle Island. It's because long time ago, when the earth was just covered in water, there were all these different animals. You had turtle, you had muskrat, you had different birds. And I kind of tell this story also really bad, but basically, all the animals were chilling and turtle was just like floating around doing its thing. And all of a sudden there was like something in the sky that like cracked. And so the birds flew up. They're like, what the heck is going on? So the birds go up and they see this like being starting to descend from the sky. So the birds fly back down. They're like, yo, there's something falling from the sky. What do we do? Like, we don't know what or who, or like, we don't know what's going on. So the animals decide to help bring this being down because it was just going to fall into the water. They knew that turtle's back was too hard. So a bunch of animals tried to dive underwater to get to the bottom and pick up some soil. But like a bunch of animals tried, they failed, and muskrat, and I don't know if anyone knows what a muskrat is, but it's like a water rat, in my opinion. You can actually see them in Jamaica ponds sometimes. But muskrat was like, oh, I'll try. And everyone was like, no, muskrat, you're not going to make it. And muskrat was just like that kid on the playground that no one liked and wanted to play with, I guess. But muskrat went down anyway and was like, nah, I'm going to try anyway. So muskrat goes down, and he was down there for a very long time. They thought that muskrat was dead and they expected him to die. But then muskrat comes back up, and in muskrat's hand was some soil. So that's what they put on turtle's back. And then the birds flew back up and helped guide this mysterious being onto turtle's back. And different stories like vary. Sometimes they say that the being was pregnant, but regardless, it was Sky Woman, who we call. And yeah, so that's like where people, or two-legged people, came to be. And some stories say that sweetgrass, which is a really beautiful medicinal, was her hair. So when she laid down on turtle's back, that's where we have sweetgrass come from. And when you smell sweetgrass, they say you remember things that you didn't even know you forgot. But yeah, so with that, I kind of like to use that story because it just kind of shows just like how nature and like animals and the land have from the beginning accepted us when we weren't in the mix at all. Like we weren't even a part of that environment, and they accepted us. And even though we were different, and I think I don't know, I feel like I'll sound corny, but I'm like, if people could just not be so terrible and more accepting of difference, maybe we wouldn't be like boiling the world and trying to colonize Mars. So maybe there'll be hope in a different generation. But yeah.
That was amazing. Do you have more slides? Was this the last slide?
Oh, I have more slides, but they're just like random photos. I don't really have too much to say, I guess, in particular, but I wasn't sure if there was like more.
Can you go back to that document?
Oh, yes, this one.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about what this is and why you chose? I read you had like notes underneath your slide. And it was like really intriguing. So, and I also think you sent me like a paper you had written.
Yeah, so one of my jobs I've done is transcribing documents that look like this for an online archive. Yeah, I don't know how to spell in our English now anymore because I'm so used to reading these. Yeah, this document is talking about it's the petition of Hannah Chore, wife of John Chore of Natick, Natick, Massachusetts. And Natick was a praying town. I had grabbed this from like an old presentation I had done, also kind of speaking to, kind of relating it to the creation story, thinking about, I don't know. I guess, well, when I had done this thing, it was like during like Trump's administration. So thinking about like the issues at the border, well, and that's not just during Trump, that's all the time, but just like thinking about like borders in general and like excluding people from the land, and then people's idea or understanding that like you can own land. But this document was kind of speaking about what is the word? Like Black and brown people experience it all the time. Like the criminalization, sorry.
Right.
I've been not speaking lately. The criminalization of our people, just for being who they are and like what they look like. And what this basic petition is talking about is the son of Hannah and John Chore. They were mixed. Or no, sorry, Natick was mixed. They were writing, and there was one of the English people that were writing on behalf of Hannah and John were talking about Natick being a place where Negroes were at, and they were just like complaining basically that like Black people were also living at Natick, and it's just it just kind of speaks to like the assumption that everyone has to be anti-Black, which most people are. I'm not gonna front, but I do think that like historically there, especially in like New England, there's like so many great examples of like deep kinship between Native and Black communities, that it's just like so not spoken about. And I think when we're thinking about Black and Native communities, it's always like we're pitted together, pitted against each other, and everyone always goes to the 5 civilized tribes that enslaved Black folks, and also like continue to this day refuse to include them in their communities, even though they were married into them and whatnot. So it's just like the same where people think like all Black people are the same, like a monolithic group. I think more often than not, when we're thinking about like Indigenous folks in North America, we're also monolithicized.
Sizing them.
Yeah, I'm like,
we're going to use it. It's a word today.
I definitely don't know that word. We're also not a monolithic group. And even in like Indian country, like a lot of times, like people won't even like respect like folks from the Northeast because we're so heavily mixed, and more often than not mixed with Black. So it just goes to show like, I don't know. I feel like those bonds are like really beautiful and need to be celebrated. And it kind of reminds me of like what Maria was talking about with like the Walden community, like the folks that were brought here, like they were Indigenous too. And half the shit that they were doing in Africa. And it would be like foolish not to think that them being in relationship to the Native people that were still around, to also like further build those skills or, you know, learn the land a little bit more, especially when we're thinking about medicine and food. So that's kind of like what this petition is kind of talking about, just the presence of Black people and other people's disappointment in that, apparently. So.
And can you just quickly say what a praying town is for people who may not know, like, they're really discussing history here?
A praying town is, so there is this guy, John Eliot, who folks might know about. He was very popular in Boston and in Massachusetts. He was just like parading around Massachusetts trying to like create like these, what is it called? He was like a missionary, basically.
Right.
And I don't know if anyone remembers like a couple years ago, that missionary that went to that like one island, like on the other side of
the was the one who got shot with the arrows?
Yes. I wish that that could have happened to John Eliot, honestly, because he was a fool. But I guess before, like, he did actually set up the towns, like, there were people that would just, like, laugh while he was, like, you know, stepping on stones and, like, doing, like, these big speeches about Christianity, and not saying that Christianity is a joke, but to force that on people that have their own values and traditions and way of understanding and relating. I don't think you need to force that on other people just because it's different than you. But then as like tensions begin to rise between the settlers and the Native population, and what led to King Philip's War, praying towns ended up being created. And when you were in a praying town, you could be considered a friend Indian. And if you weren't in a praying town, then people would think that you were like a savage, you were threatening. During King Philip's War, if you were not in a praying town, you could just be shot on sight because they would think that you were like an agitator. So praying towns just became this place that you were like forced to assimilate. Like you had to wear English style clothes, gender roles were enforced, just the total opposite of our daily lives were created in those towns. But then it ended up being to a point where that was a point of safety, but then that ended up being a load of bullshit anyway. So that's what a praying town is basically, but I'm sure Google will probably say something different.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know. And then some of the other slides that you had, I really want you to talk, because we are kind of coming up on our time for this afternoon. I really want you to talk about like rematriation. I don't think a lot of people necessarily like understand what that word means. Most times when I say it, they're like repatriation. And just all of this work that you're doing now with the land, and also like the communities here.
Yeah, so so land rematriation, or rematriation in general, like I really think of it as a more of a rebalancing, and it's not that like, you know, instead of the patriarchy, it's the matriarchy. I mean, it is, but it's not like, so like boys suck, girls rule sort of idea. It's more of a rebalancing. It's not anything that has to do with like having more power over the other. It's a rebalancing of our land, our whole selves, our food system, our children, our medicine, everything that we need and have a right to that more often than not has been like severed from us. So with the work that I do with Eastern Woodlands Rematriation, it's a collective of Indigenous Two-Spirit and mostly femmes, but also tribal folk in the area. And the work looks different because rematriation is so many things, or rematriation is such a large thing that so many things need to be working in order for it to happen. And we really prioritize relationality, relationships, and reciprocity. And when I'm thinking about reciprocity, it's not like you do something for me, I do something for you, because even with that relationship, it's still transactional. Reciprocity is the understanding that, like, for example, when we're thinking about the land, I'm losing my thought. It's gone. Like when we're thinking about the land, for example, like things will pop up when you need them most. And in order for you to understand that and see that, you have to be in relationship to the land. So kind of similar to like the forest bathing thing that Maria was talking about. For one example, this last spring, like at the start of COVID, well, I would say from like May through July, I started to focus a lot on creating grief blends, because for me personally, that was the only thing that I could get myself to do, just with the state of the world. And even now, like I'm like always in like a mind fuck that ran a pandemic, and like people are really trying to act like shit is business as usual when this isn't usual at all. Like this is so disturbing that how do you reconcile with that? And like, so for me, the only thing that makes sense for me right now is to make grief blends, because we're all grieving in like the different ways to process that. But a couple of years ago when I was blueberry picking with some of the youth in this photo, actually, I came across St. John's wort, and I had picked a little bit to try to infuse it in oil. And got moldy, and I never really worked with it after that. But this year, it popped up just out of the blue on my reservation, and I've never seen St. John's wort. I was like, work there, live there, or like pop up. So to my like point with thinking about like medicine or like things popping up when you need it most, St. John's wort is a really good plant. It's good for, you could use it as like a natural antidepressant. So I felt like that plant, like the time was right for me to use that plant. And I only picked a little bit and let the rest continue to grow. But I'm thinking of reciprocity in that way because the land, because of my relationship to that land at my reservation, I feel like we have an understanding of like what one needs or wants in certain moments. So I feel like in that instance, like that was like a reciprocal relationship because it offered something to me that I had never expected it to have. And then I also plant a lot of things there. A lot of the deer and other animals eat it. So, you know, being a good kin person, even though it's frustrating that they eat everything, but it is what it is. You always have to leave. You always have to make sure that there's things still for the land and for the other communities or beings to have too. I usually never go somewhere and take. And if I do take, I always give something back. I don't know what I was just babbling about, but yeah, so with rematriation, it's just, for me, I really hold strong reciprocity relationships and like a rebalancing.
I love that idea of giving back. So I know one of my friends, Lanice C. Devotion, I'm going to shout her out. She always teaches me to leave like beans or seeds or something at the site of where like I'm cutting, you know what I mean? Like something to nourish the soil. Oh yeah, and then the corn. We did pick corn with you a couple years ago.
Yeah, this is the corn ground up. We grounded it this summer. It's the same corn that you picked.
So this is the cornmeal.
Oh
man. Can you talk just really quickly? We only have like 3 minutes left. I feel like this is not enough time. Can you just tell us the story of this corn really quickly? Because I feel like this is actually kind of like a perfect note to kind of end the conversation on.
Yeah, I can't speak too much about it, but it came to my cousin in a dream. And corn is just like a crucial plant for Native people all over the place. And it really speaks to relationships because we got the corn from the global South. And then like over thousands of years now, it's not naturalized, but like we cultivated it to a certain degree here, and like all throughout Turtle Island or throughout the world, there's different types of corn. This corn is a flint corn. And it's they were able to find the corn that was most likely from the Nipmuc region, is southern New England region, so it's closely related to the Narragansett and Wampanoag corns as well. But we were able to grow this corn, and we had like folks from our community come out, and Massachusetts folks come out, and we all harvested the corn, and we were able to distribute the corn throughout our community. And then this year, or 2020, we had gotten a like a grinder, like a mill sort of thing, like a small one that you put on a countertop. But we were able to distribute the cornmeal that we grew through our community as well. So yeah, I feel like corn is just like a beautiful relative. And there's so many stories about corn that, yeah, we love corn.
Yeah, I remember going out and picking, and just like the story behind how you guys came to start growing again was just, I think, just a really beautiful example of like what rematriation means, and just, yeah, just the work in general that you do. And I want to invite Maria back on if you're still there. I don't know if we got questions from the audience. Let me see. And I think we got one question from Sierra. Oh man, I can't even pronounce this word. Can you talk a little bit about the role of despatialization and land theft through treaties and contracts? And this applies both in Jamaica and here, in the Caribbean and here. I don't know if anyone has anything to say on that.
Do you have anything, Maria? Or
or too much to say, maybe?
I mean, all I can say is that when I come upon a trailhead that has a sign about not picking mushrooms, mostly because of this idea that people don't really understand mushrooms. And so when you're saying don't pick, a chicken of the woods from a stump, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense scientifically. It doesn't really make a lot of sense in other ways. But it's also just a way to control people's movements and people's actions while they're in the woods. And maybe it keeps people from picking responsibly and doing things that, you know, would not be beneficial to the land. But there's also this weird paternalism again. Like, we don't know how to manage our own movements through the woods. Like, I know what I'm doing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I really don't know what despatialization means, but it sounds like
Yeah, I was trying to pronounce it. I was like,
can I ask out loud?
Yeah, go ahead, Sierra. Sierra's on the call with us. Yeah, totally. Ask your question.
Okay, sorry. So I guess I was trying to get at the way that like people control other people's movements. So how we tell people where they decide to go, how we create ghettos, how we create reservations, etc.
Yeah, so for the Nipmuc context, like well, the context from this place, I would say like just from the jump, they like came over and just started like acting like we didn't know what we were doing, or like but I don't, yeah, like there's not many like treaties here that like in other places, like especially like out west or even further north have. I feel the Northeast or like New England was like a trial, like a project for settlers and like colonialism to like really like work out all their kinks before they perfected it further west and further north. But as far as like contracts, like for example, like the petition that I showed earlier, there's other petitions that do have a lot to do with land in the 16 and 1700s and 1800s and even part of the 1900s. I'm like, let me just say forever, but we were considered wards of the Commonwealth. So we would have, they had divided our land up after they were already encroaching on our land. They would knock down trees. They would have their cows and pigs destroy our planting fields and like shit everywhere. And then there's this plant that grows everywhere now. It's called plantain. We also call it white man's footprint because it wasn't here before they came. And when there were cows, they would like crap or whatever, and plantain would grow. And that's how you knew that that land was different. But plantain is now a very wonderful plant to use. It's good for everything. But yeah, like they would encroach on the land, destroy our crops. And then they eventually divided up our land into different allotments. So before the Reservation Act, there was the Allotment Act, and that was based off of the praying town system that they set up here in Massachusetts, or what we know as Massachusetts. But yeah, I feel like that role is really just, again, that paternalism, and just in general, that idea of controlling where people need to be. Because there's stories of, especially in Grafton, there was this one woman, Sarah Boston. The stories that they wrote about her, you would think that she was like some monster, but they would be like, these vagrant natives are just walking around selling their baskets all drunk, and like we weren't even allowed to walk around and like harvest from our like harvesting spots. And like we were called vagrant because we understood that you don't live in one place all the time because the land needs to breathe, and you can't plant from the same place all the time and harvest from there because, again, the land needs to breathe. And you can't just like keep extracting from the same spot. But because we understood that extremely logical concept, we were vagrants and didn't know what the hell was going on. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it does. It does. We have another question, I think from Bird. And Bird is asking, what are some steps people can take to start on the journey of learning about land and how to live with nature? I think that's kind of it may be a broad question, but I think kind of specifically speaking to that like responsible relationship, like where's a good place to maybe start? If maybe like you're thinking of getting into farming, and we talked a little bit about this, Nia, like if you're getting into farming or foraging, there's still ways that you can like perpetuate, you know, like inequity in doing so. So like, how can we start that responsible relationship to the land that we're on?
Mm-hmm. Do you want to go first? I don't want to keep talking. I feel like I'm going to start going on a rant. So
my answer is simple. Find an elder. Find someone who has been around doing the thing for a while, because they will be able to tell you, you know, don't over harvest the ramps because then they're not going to come back. Don't pick all of the, you know, the fiddleheads, because if you do, then they're not going to, like, all of these things that people who have been doing it for a while before you will know.
Yeah, I think also just getting to, like, if you are thinking about like foraging or just relating to, I don't know, being in contact with nature, for me, like, it's always just like building that relationship first before you do anything. There are certain plants that I'm so excited to be able to work with, but I don't, because I don't have a relationship with them yet. And that would be a disservice to the plant, the medicine that I would make in the land, because I'm just taking without any understanding or grounding. So for me, it's really about just trying to spend the time of like where you're wanting to, and just build that relationship. Yeah, and that can look different for everyone. Like, I don't like bugs, like, at all. And like, yeah, there's a lot of things I find really gross about nature sometimes, but I'll still, there's certain places I go to, like, I feel really drawn to water, so I spend a lot of time near water, and things of like that. And like, then there's certain things that will pop up. But for me, it's just about building a relationship. It's like as if you're going to date someone or become friends with someone. Like, you don't just like spend time in their house like the first time. Like, no, sometimes there's a talking phase, or like you like a couple photos on Instagram. Like, I don't know, just flirt a little bit, like dip your toe in, and just build that relationship. It takes time, and try not to get caught up in like instant gratification. Just like really think about the process of relationship building and having that genuine relationship, because that's what's going to be worthwhile. And thinking about that, that's probably why there's a lot of relationship issues between people too, because people rush. They don't spend the time to build that relationship and have that process in its full entirety. So yeah.
Right, 100%. That is very apt analogy. I think people are very into like instant gratification, and there's been like this analogy that's been going around a lot, like, you don't pick the flower the day that you plant the seed, you know, like this analogy for like being patient and waiting for things to grow. And I think we had one other question, but we kind of answered it. You kind of already answered it, Nia. I think in general, like, do you guys, like, how do you guys feel like your work connects to like Black feminism overall? Like, and do you feel like it does? Or is it like a new awakening for you that you could just kind of found, you know, that there is this intersection between the two?
Well, I will say that this past fall was the first time that I went out with Black and brown femmes in the area to just do forays. I had never really done forays before, and just some people who lived in some of the areas I was going to didn't know that the woods there existed. And so that just really pointed up the desire to get out there and see what's going on with the land, but not necessarily ever even feeling like the place where the mushrooms are coming up is theirs. So it has, like I said during the presentation, it went from a solitary thing, just learning, sort of in my room by myself, to really seeing that there is a hunger and a desire out there to get out and take these forays. So it's brand new to me, for sure.
I would say yes. Like, it's hard. Well, I'm not going to say it's hard not to, because there's plenty of people that may not relate to it. But I feel like for me, just how I understand Black feminism, in that, like, it's not like mainstream feminism, obviously. I feel like it gets more to the point. It's more grounded and rooted in like the understanding of like intersectionality and collectivism, and but collectivism and like so there's not like levels. What is that? Hierarchy? Like
Right.
Yeah. So, and that's kind of like how I really that's like kind of in the way that I work. Like, I work from like an even plane for all my relationships, whether it's with the land, whether it's with other people, whether it's with plants, whether it's with animals, except for spiders. Yeah, I would say yes. And I feel like some of the different teachings or concepts that I've understood that come from Black feminism just sort of like strengthen and validate the way that I do work. And it helps me trust myself that much more, because I feel like sometimes what I'm doing or saying doesn't make any sense, because how could it in the world that we live in? But thinking about that just kind of make me feel a little less crazy and alone, I guess. I don't know.
Thank you so much. I want to thank the both of you for taking time out of your Saturday to join us in conversation. Obviously, an hour and a half, 2 hours is not nearly enough time for us to really delve into all of these things, but I highly encourage you guys watching to follow both Nia and Maria. If you guys could just plug your Instagram accounts really quick. And Nia works with Nia, and then Maria is at A Raven's Grace, which I love. I love that name.
That's the old AIM screen name.
I know. I still I still kept mine too. That's so funny.
Yeah.
Go back.
And then beyond that, I would, love to thank Boston Center for the Arts for hosting this conversation and for partnering with us on this exhibition. And we do have another program coming up. Just, keep your eyes peeled on the Boston Center for the Arts website. And you can also follow us at Print Ain't Dead. And we will be announcing the date of that next program, which will probably be April, May. And beyond that, we hope that everybody watching has a good weekend, a good Saturday, a good Sunday. And yeah, I guess that's it. I guess we can go ahead and end. Thank y'all so much.
Thank y'all.